Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Got it. I hope everyone's doing well. This is a webinar we have been excited about for a while, and we definitely look forward to hearing what you guys are going to share. I know it's going to be wonderful. You are most welcome, and yeah, we know we're going to learn a lot from you. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us, Gnocchi. My name is Paulo. I'm here with Marcelo. We're gonna, be speaking about how we grew a team and a code base at Remote. High level view of the patterns that we use. It's not too in depth. We are limited by time, but always welcome to interact with the folks in the community to know more about it. So I'm gonna start the presentation. We're gonna split this into kind of two sections. Marcelo will drive the first two ones, and I'll speak about the second ones. 1 second. Okay, let me just know if you all can see my screen.
Yep.
Cool. As I said, so we're going to be speaking a bit about growing a team and a code base here at Remote. So a bit of context about Remote to those of you that don't know. So Remote was founded in 2019 by Job and Marcelo. And the main goal is to simplify how companies employ global talent across the world. We're pretty much invested daily on a mission to open up the world for everyone, every business, every person to have opportunities. So a bit about Marcelo. I think I'll leave up to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Paulo. So I've my story with Elixir and my story overall. I'm a software engineer. I've been coding professionally since 2012. Scratch that. 2010 actually. So 2010, and I've done a few different things. I became a first thing that I did was a software researcher and a bit developer on sensor networks and IoT. Then worked in QA engineering for a bit of time. Then I decided I was tired of telling people what to do and just did it myself. So I spent the next years building apps and working with startups. Became a team leader, then a manager, then lead, eventually CTO and a VP a couple times over. Ultimately, I was working with whatever tool was best for the job. So I work with Java, C++, Ruby, Python, Elixir, experimented a bit with Go a few times as well. I never wanted to just get too attached to a single tool, to a single platform. But ultimately, eventually I became a CTO to a portfolio, to a VC fund. And what we would do was we would invest in companies and then help them build their software, scale, hire people. I would coach the team leaders, the managers, and also how to build proper code bases. And what a lot of those teams were, those code bases were Ruby at the time. And what I found was that essentially a lot of them had the same problems. A lot of them had the same fundamental issues. And so eventually I started looking for answers, and I found Elixir. That's a long story about how, and this was 2015. And I started looking into Elixir between 2014 and 2015, very convinced that it was a great solution overall, and how it could impact the world of apps building and especially startups and its whole trade-off, but we'll talk about it in a bit. And that's it. Paulo.
Thank you so much. So now a bit about me. So I'm Paulo. I'm the VP of Engineering here at Remote. I joined a year ago. Really happy to be able to join this great company and help building the team with all of the folks here. Previously, I've worked in my previous job was around travel industry in a big MENA region group, probably the biggest there. And prior to that, I've worked at Onfido, one of the early engineers, and then became a bit like Marcelo, like became team lead, and opened up an office in Lisbon. And I was also driving the adoption of Elixir within the company and two set of products that we had. Very pragmatic about the tools as well. Have no big preferences, but I have like special fondness about Elixir. In the meantime, I've also wrote a book in 2015 called Elixir Cookbook. It was very simple, kind of a recipe book. And more recently, co-authored the book around microservices. Very passionate about tooling, about finding the proper tool for a given job, and being very pragmatic. And I think like this is pretty much what the combination of it is, getting into remote where everyone is very pragmatic about the tools that we use. But again, as Marcelo said, we're going to hear a bit more about that. So topics that we'll be covering: why we chose Elixir at remote, how we organize our backend code base. Then I will be also chatting a bit about the growth that we've experienced and give you some metrics and some insights so that we can all kind of appreciate the scale that we're talking about. And then going to just briefly touch how Elixir is actually helping and enabling the growth of our team as an organization. Then we'll have a session of Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Marcelo to kind of give you the reasoning about why why we chose Elixir at remote.
Thanks, Paulo. So as I said, as I was sort of coaching and working with a lot of different companies, I realized that, especially coming from Ruby and Python, I found the same problems. It was scalability, reliability, the use of resources that the code base is required, and the technical stack demanded as well. And then ultimately the amount of people that you could hire to work on a project. So I was trying to answer those questions, and I was like, okay, every single company is going through growth pains, technical growth pains. Stuff doesn't scale. It's not fast enough. It's broken often. Servers go down very frequently. The bill to run an efficient app with time starts to stack up because you need to beef up the machine, so on and so forth. So I was looking for options, and because I came from a telco background, I was looking into Erlang. The problem with Erlang is that very few people wanted to work with it. They would look at the language and don't feel welcome by its syntax. And that was driving a lot of people to not even want to learn about the language itself. But the potential was massive. The concurrency model, the reliability, the paradigm behind it, the functional programming, or concurrent programming, rather. And on top of all the things was like a very mature code base as well, and framework, because Erlang exists for 20, 30 years, maybe a bit more. And I was so impressed, like, with all that was still being built on top of the Erlang community, which is very active, but absolutely not welcoming to people learning to code, companies that needed to move fast, that needed great documentation, great way to hire people, and fast way to do so, and also a good pool of people. And so it didn't add up, right? For the fast pace of companies nowadays, it didn't add up, because you'd not be able to convince anyone to, or very little people, to start working in Erlang unless they absolutely needed to. And as I was ranting about the different options, I was also looking at Clojure, Go. Everyone had like massive drawback. And a friend of mine eventually said, "But have you looked into Elixir?" And I was like, "No." And they said, "Well, the guy like is behind the Device built a programming language," and I knew him. Like, Joseph was a very known person in the market and in the industry. So I started looking into it, and what I realized is that it was giving me all the benefits of Ruby: great syntax, coding syntax, great technical knowledge, documentation, because it was there from day one. A great community, because there was a lot of people moving from Ruby to Elixir for the same reason that I did. I was part of that movement, and also benefiting from the maturity of Erlang, the technical benefits, and also all that comes with that whole community, and also know-how in scaling and doing things reliably in the concurrency model, which was very, very mature. And I was just staggered at how much it would enable you to build with all those benefits. It almost felt like an unfair trade-off. So I jumped on the wagon, and for several years I've just built things on the side, like for myself. I found a way to eventually bring this into companies that I was working at, convincing people to adopt it, to trial it out. Now, it spread like wildfire because everyone eventually acknowledged like the massive benefits of doing this. And the only drawback at the time was the amount of people you could hire locally. And then eventually it came to a point where I wanted to start remote with Job. And we were considering which technology we're going to start with. And in my mind, it was very clear. I don't want to build a company where I have to be worried about the technology, if the technology will hold. If tomorrow I'm going to add 100 new users or 1,000 more users, and if the stack is going to hold, or if I'm going to have to pipe $10,000 more every month just to be able to scale horizontally or vertically my stack. And this was eventually when, of course, it dawned on me, well, Elixir is the way to go. The community is strong enough. The background is strong enough. I know enough of Elixir. I had built many, many apps with Elixir in my time before. So I chose Elixir. And that was the moment where we started remote with Elixir first. And actually the first few lines were fundamental Elixir, because I was doing some integration, some scrapers at the time. And that was it. The fundamental reason why we started with Elixir. And even the biggest unknown was, will I be able to hire enough people? But the truth here was that because remote is remote from day one, I had the whole world to hire from. So I wasn't bound. In my previous company, I started Elixir there, but then I know they struggled a bit and eventually abandoned the project because they didn't have enough know-how after I left, and a couple of other people left as well, which was fair, because it wasn't easy for them to hire as it was for remote to hire. And so it was a very easy choice as well. And that was it. That's how remote was built, and still is very much being built with Elixir first.
So yeah, thank you so much, Marcelo, for the insights. Now also, continuing with Marcelo, he's actually, coined a lot of the architecture, the original architecture of the application, which we still follow and obviously adapt as we grow. But the principles, the base principles are still there. We have a couple of important mantras in the engineering team. One of them being that unshipped work is work not done. And you've heard Marcelo speaking, like previously, mentioning the need for moving fast, the need to adapt quickly. So shipping is a top priority. Because if no one uses what you're building, there's no point to actually keep on building it. And we have 3 laws of engineering, which are make it work. If you really, really need to, make it beautiful, and if you really, really need it, make it fast. We abide to these principles. It's again speed, iteration. So we needed something, a language in this case, that allowed us to do this. But we also needed some architectural patterns that will enable us to grow and to continue to make things work and be very pragmatic and very efficient and effective with what we release. So the way we organize our code base around application architecture principles and 4 patterns that are used throughout our code base, and we'll see a bit about how they interact. Around architecture principles, Marcelo, if you want to speak a bit, do you want to kind of think about your architecture implementation? And
I'll talk about a bit about like the motivation why we adopted this in the first place, and why these, like, why does it matter? And so then Paulo, of course, will take it away, and go a deep dive into it. So again, from my previous experiences, what I understood is that stack code bases rot very fast. You start with like the most beautiful greenfield project ever. You're very happy because you in your head you're like, oh, this is gonna be the cleanest code I've ever written. I'm gonna always keep it pristine. Maximum amount of code and tests will be the best. 2 weeks later, you already hate it. You hate yourself for it. You keep apologizing to everyone that looks at your code or the code base, and it starts giving you problems. And the more you think, well, I'll fix it later, it becomes unfixable, and you just end up having the same problems over and over again. So then there were a few blog posts at the time that I was working heavily with Ruby that were super. Adolfo, you're saying that you're having trouble with audio. Can you hear me well now? Is it okay? No?
Yes, yes.
Cool. I can.
We can hear.
Okay, cool. So, what happened was that I all the blog posts that I would read about, like maintaining a code base or scaling, all in all, would point to the same problems, absolutely the same problems, which was a lack of adherence to the basic principles, the things that we read or know as common sense, like the single responsibility principle, in which like something should only do one thing, do it well, and that's it. Anything else, you just delegate and ship it over to other things. Open close principle, you should extend but not modify based on a use case, so that you can replace, stack up in and out whenever you want, which is tied to the Liskov substitution principle very, very tightly. And then eventually, how do these things communicate? Are there specific integrations or signatures for functions or the things that you call that don't really end up being like a chain of 10 different arguments or parameters, and that are tied to a very single use case, and then input changes from an integer to a string, and you're doomed, right? And so ultimately, this all, of course, building on top of abstractions and all the things that connect this, it became very apparent to me that you needed a way, almost boxes, to store your code. How are you going to apply these like 5 fundamental, the solid principles that will keep you sane? And now, when you look at this, it's like, oh yeah, but this works for like very massive code bases, because otherwise you're going to be super slow. You have to have all your documentation and all that crazy stuff. It's actually not true. You can build super fast. You can ship super fast as long as you keep it simple. Like, and so throughout a lot of iterations, I found out that if I applied 4 different patterns, I could very much harness the power of the solid principles without having to keep in mind all single principles and then some, just to make my code great. Because even there in the past, I saw some code bases that adhere to all principles, and then you couldn't even understand your own code because it would just nested amount of problems. So I gathered all the things that I've learned from different code bases, different people, and I summed it all up to solve the solid principles in 4 ways: handlers, services, finders, and values. You can almost think about them from top to bottom. So very quickly, a handler gets stuff in. It's like it's the first responder in a way. So it's like if you're thinking about a endpoint or something else, it doesn't have to be an endpoint, it doesn't have to be a web app, it could be something else. It is the entity that is responsible for dispatching a few things. you can think about it as a head of department, right? If you have a question about, I don't know, your payroll, you go to the payroll department. If you have a question about your engineering stuff, you go to the engineering department. So you think about the handlers as, okay, I'm going to get something, and based on whatever I get, I'm going to decide what to do next. And you have multiple handlers for different scenarios and different use cases. Then, of course, inside of a handler, you have certain ways that you can go about things. Of course, you have services and finders or values. So it is about fundamental composition. What you do is, if I get input A, then I'm going to get this service. Service is something that acts upon something. It's like an executor, a writer. It's a bit inspired by the CQRS pattern, old pattern, command query responsibility segregation, in the sense that services are like your verb. They will do something for you. They will calculate, they will mutate, they will build structures for you. If you need to find something, be it a query from a database, another website, another API, another endpoint, you call it a finder. And absolutely, at the end of all things, when you want to have an object that represents your end result, so solve for X, a value is how you represent that X. And now a value, the strong part of all this, and now going back from the latest to the first one, a value, it can be a representation of whatever. So imagine that you make a query, you send something, a service makes. Let me give you an example. You're going to ask a website to, it's a shopping cart, right? You selected an iPhone, laptop, whatever, and now you want to pay. Submit. Okay, the handler will get the parameters for your order. Now you'll need to check, are these in stock? So you'll use finders to understand if you can read information on database or other websites, and you'll find about this information. Then what you want to do is, okay, I want to lock them up because I'm going to proceed with a purchase. So you're going to use finders to lock and signal every single item that you're going to buy them. Okay, great. And then you're going to use another service to say, okay, now I want to calculate the cost for all these different items. And ultimately, you're going to have to reply with a response, right? You're going to have to put it together and say, iPhone costs $500, laptop costs $1,000, socks costs $20, whatever. And then you need to represent it. And now a value is used so that you can pass this information around without having to call things back over and over and over again, but also to represent them in whichever way you want externally. So a value can respond typically to something along the lines of, hey, this is now internally as a binary because it's a bunch of integers and strings and whatnot. But now I actually want to shift, I want to just answer this and I want to send the information back. So you can make your values respond to different functions like a to.json or a to.xml. And so what we'll do is apply transformation of the core information to whatever serialization process you want. So you can think about it as serializers. So ultimately, what these four patterns, and of course you have those dots and you have those arrows which tell you that this is the way that we mapped out through an image what is the hierarchy of things. Otherwise, you just everything would call everything and then it just go nuts. So handlers are the top of the chain. They can call services finders values. If they're super complex, maybe they can call internally, because sometimes you have an endpoint that is actually an aggregation of multiple endpoints that they can call others. And a service can either call another service or other things like finder or value. Finders can only call the internal assets like database, another website, and then compose values. And values can compose themselves, meaning that you can have a value that is a composition of 10 other values, and all of this, all that you can see here, is 100% reusable. And then you may think, well, but what is the gain in all of this? Why, like, of course, behind the solid principles, what is the maximum, like pragmatically speaking, why should I worry about this? Why should I even go through the hustle of doing this? Well, what I can tell you is that from personal experience, remote is the second time I use this professionally. And I can tell that it is also, remote is also the biggest code base that I use this for. And it enabled us to build super fast. And you'd be insanely surprised at how fast we can solve and iterate on things. Because if I come here and I tell you, look, by the way, now rather than building replying with a JSON, I want you to send gRPC or another form of binary response. In all the locked in and tightly coupled architectures, you would have to go to every single part where you extract some information from the database and you serialize it and change that serialization into whatever new method you want. You would probably even double copy paste the entire function and then change the output. So here, essentially, you just have to write one small function within a value, and that is it, nothing else. So affecting all the different platforms in the same way, on the different levels in the same way. And that's it. That was the reason. It enables us to build fast, grow super lean, iterate at the speed of light, and never have to let go of our principles, and enable us to scale and prevent an architecture from rotting because some more people adds. And also great for people to look around the code base. Of course, there are some these are all the pros. The cons, that the one that I felt the most is that this creates a lot of files. You become, like, in terms of number of files, it does create a lot more, which performance-wise doesn't matter at all because it's all compiled. But the truth here is that you gain so much clarity knowing that one single file is as a single responsibility principle. Same for functions, services, finders, values, handlers. It's super easy to onboard anyone and someone, and that's it. Paulo, you can take it away now.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll be sharing the slides afterwards, I assume. So you can actually see a bit more about this more in depth. Marcelo presented on 2020 on Code BMV. And then we also have a library that was created by one of our engineers, by Kramer, which kind of makes easy to generate all of these handlers, services, the values, and yeah, this is pretty much it. And Marcelo touched the point about scaling, about growing, about all of this, and then the code base needs to enable much more than just the code that you deploy and the application that you have. Marcelo mentioned before the fact that we're very privileged by being a company that works remotely and being remote and hiring wherever in the world. And this is actually something that has enabled us to grow our team a lot. And the code base, the state of the code base, the type of patterns that we use, the velocity of onboarding, that all matters to get folks happy, to get folks being able to quickly understand and grasp the concepts of the areas they're working in, and to be able to onboard them to grow and get us more capacity. So so right now we have our engineering team is about 120 something engineers. I'm just mentioning between all the backend engineers. Currently we have 55. Our backend code base has about like 14,000 commits. The mean time to merge from April 2021 to 2022 is about 3 days. So from starting something and actually getting that thing shipped, we often ship things a lot faster than this. There's 84%, about 84% of code coverage, which also helps. And I think the architecture we shows also helps, maintaining this ratio, this good ratio of code coverage. Just sharing with you the evolution of the team, because I think, like, graphically saying, hey, yeah, 55 engineers. This is what means from January 2021 up until now. This is the growth that we've been experiencing. And as you would imagine, there's a lot of folks joining the team, a lot of new folks joining the team, and a lot of new folks onboarding on a code base. We're talking about 10 times the number of folks that we would have on January 2021. And we've evolved so far. We've produced a lot of code. There's, as you know, fundamentally 10 times more engineers than they were originally. So having the patterns in place, having a sane structure also helps that we can actually go together, obviously iterating, obviously making improvements where it makes sense, but moving together as a kind of a unite, as a front, as a group of folks, and not being delayed, or having endless discussions about shall I place this in this file, shall I use this context, this domain. So it's kind of an enabler so far. Around the number of commits, this is also to give you an idea of how many commits we're doing on this particular code base. We have two main code bases, one front end and one backend. So this is alone the backend one. There are periods of time where we actually move a lot faster. There's a trend, an ever increased trend of commits. So more code being produced. Not necessarily true. Some code also being deleted. We're very keen on that, and I think that's the moment of biggest happiness, when you can do the same or better with less code. And around the number of deployments, this is also to give you the scale of how we are, how agile, how fast we are. Marcelo mentioned this multiple times in this webinar. The idea is, having something that allows us to be fast, to be agile, to be, respond quickly. And this is like an average of the deployments that we have per day. So we're talking about, in times doing more than 10 deployments per day, not per week, not per, 2 weeks. So this is kind of numbers that I wanted to share with you, because I think they give you a bit of the perspective of what this code base, about these patterns have enabled us to do as an engineering org. And so back to the topic of how this does Elixir help us grow as an engineering organization. I think there's a lot done right in Elixir, in Phoenix. There's little to no magic. Things happen. Things are things are easy to understand. They are you can customize things, and this is super useful when you're onboarding folks into a team, into different teams. We have a single backend code base, but we are divided in verticals, and we are divided in about 25 teams, if I'm not mistaken, and all of those teams are working on that same code base. We can, reduce overlaps. We can be very nimble and not step on anyone's toes because of the organization that we have, but also because of, it's easy to understand how things are done, and there's no magic, no implicit things that you need to learn or to memorize. Everything is very explicit. There's also, as Marcelo said, the fact that Elixir has great documentation, a super friendly community, and these patterns that we are using help us a lot to onboard new team members. All in all, going from 5 to 55, there's a huge growth happening in between, and means that there's at least 55 people that had to be onboarded. Sometimes we have 3 or 4 or 5 engineers being onboarded on different teams in the same month and the same week. And it's really important that we have chosen a language, a framework that allows us to do that with little friction and allows folks to feel productive quite quickly. So we normally have a general onboarding of a week, and then the second week of onboarding for technical onboarding. But it's very common for folks to be able to deliver small changes, small features, like getting quickly into the code base quite fast. So we can see that the language, the architecture is never a barrier; it's more of an enabler. We are also seeing a growing adoption of Elixir, which is something that if we go back in time a couple of years, there's always this doubt: will there ever be enough engineers? I think there's a lot of folks getting interested into it, and but it's also a very probably I won't use very, but it's an easy language to learn. Beautifully designed, small core, so it's easy to ramp up quickly. Amazing documentation, it was built with the the developer, the end user in mind. So trying to get the lowest kind of less steepest ramp for adoption. And we also are seeing one thing, which is we are enabling folks to actually grow into that community, moving from other languages and actually adopting Elixir by providing a 1-month training on the job. And we have already onboarded 8 engineers, if I'm not mistaken. And it has been like a success story. One of the folks, and I think the first one joining without prior experience in Elixir, we recently had a one-on-one, and they were saying that it's amazing. They don't want to go back because working in this code base, working in Elixir makes them smile daily, and have this feeling of joy. And I think that this is super useful. So it's great for us to be working on something, a mission that we have, but also using a tool that makes us happy. So I think now we can open the floor for some questions and answers. Let me just stop sharing because otherwise I won't be able to see the chat.
So I have this open, the Slido app. I can start reading the questions and we just go through them. So the one with the more likes is it difficult to hire remote Elixir developers? I never struggled. I can speak when, of course, I was more involved before Paulo joined. I never I actually, to be honest, I struggle with having so many applicants. A remote, we have, I don't know how are the metrics today, but many dozens. When I was still filtering through applicants, it was many dozens, if not hundreds a day of applicants at the time. We were hiring a lot. A lot of people had experience with Elixir as side projects. I would say at the time like 30-40% had, maybe just making numbers up, how they felt to me at the time. I had some professional experience, but the fact that we were able to hire across the globe and it didn't matter where people were from, it made it super easy for us to hire, have access to great developers, Elixir. And also, José Valim, the creator of Elixir, is an advisor of Remote. So he is, I would say, part of the team in a way, because he sits down with the team, provides a lot of opinion and feedback, is always on ready to jump on a call with us to talk about strategy, technology, and stuff like that. And so it makes it quite appealing to a lot of people as well. And we have a really good culture, I believe, but I'm super biased. Paulo, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely not hard. Initially, we were focusing on experience because companies have different stages. We're focusing a lot on delivery, on building foundations, and we seeked for experience. Not like huge experience, but some more experience. And we've had folks joining from junior level, mid level, senior level. So far, it's not hard to find. It's not hard to find talent. We're very mindful of one thing at Remote, which is values alignment. We're privileged of being able to we don't use the word culture fit or the expression culture fit. We are proud to have many cultures, but like embodying those values, so that's what plays the most important part in our hiring process. Talent and skills, they're not that hard to find, and Elixir is by no means a blocker. I would say that's even an enabler, especially on folks wanting to change, to join this amazing community.
Cool. So next question is, how do you implement dependency inversion in Elixir? Paulo, there are many, especially dependency inversion is you have multiple ways to go about it. Sometimes it's a bit more strict because it fundamentally depends on what is the use case that you're trying to tackle. Now, of course, I think Paulo could even share some bits of our code base. We have a bit, not a lot. And the truth here is that And also, I think I saw some one question that also could relate in a bit, which was about how do subtypes, behaviors, protocols, how do we deal with substitutions? You'd be surprised the amount of time that you don't really need it. What I mean is, most of the times, applying patterns like behaviors, protocols, unless you have a wide application for this, it's just easy that you build like a service with one single function that just does it. Because the odds are the reuse of that function is more useful and better ROI than going down the rabbit hole or implementing a new pattern altogether. Um, I don't, to be honest, I haven't coded in, I would say, more than a year. And the last project I built was a side project that we call paper threads, and for live view, where it's just like a sort of a task. If you have an idea, you post it there, people comment and decide to move forward or not. So I don't have clear examples in my mind of where we use it in our code base.
Yeah, I'm also detached from the code base. If you have a VP of engineering coding, you're in a bad place. But what Marcelo said around the functions, sometimes that explicitness. And when I mentioned around no magic, and protocols are by no means magic, but I think like having these small functions and the files that are very explicit, it's really easy. It doesn't cost anything. The cost of change is little, and you don't have, above all, you don't need the cognitive load of having to understand that there is this other thing, this other protocol. It may make sense, and in a couple of applications in the past, I've actually used the protocols as a way to serialize across the board, like some sort of like microservices. You can use the protocols as a bit like libraries, not necessarily libraries, but it's good to kind of maintain the data that you're passing through different systems. But I do think that sometimes you need to be very pragmatic, and the fact that writing a function, writing more line of code, smaller ones, they're easy to do. The cost is little, and when you're that fast paced, I think, to sum it up, because I'm kind of blabbing a bit, to sum it up is when you're moving so fast, when you're iterating so fast, I think those types of abstractions, they require you identifying patterns and investing a lot more time to do them properly. So you're probably going to do it once you get into the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth occurrence of the same pattern that you've identified. Otherwise, it just doesn't make much sense to go all and invest immediately on that.
There was at the time there was one use case that for which I used dependency in version. So essentially, I can give you an example. It was a bit to help. So values actually use this a bit, but it is one. So there was one item actually in Elixir documentation that says you shouldn't use stuff that you're not comfortable about, especially if it goes into macros. And for you to use dependency in version in Elixir, you're probably going to end up having to fiddle a bit with macros. And a lot of even the greatest Elixir engineers, they're not 100% comfortable working around macros. I built quite a few when before I stopped coding, especially to generate new actions on demand based on providing information, the modules and the parameters, and then module the action based on that. So of course, doing what the pattern states it should be doing. And it was great, believe me, but I used it twice, and the company is now 3 years old. Now I only coded for like a year and a half, 2 years. And I literally pushed everyone else to not do it. And so the only area that we should maybe use it were those two use cases, because it wouldn't make up for the hustle. Not everyone feels comfortable working on it. It's a huge investment of time, and often you don't end up reusing that a lot. So when I use it in values to make sure that I was be able to pass on whatever I wanted to serialize and how I wanted to serialize it. And the other case was to generate internal events, where I would pass on the action that I wanted to build, the parameters that it should take, and then later on the fly, on demand, spin up new functions based on whatever thing I was trying to accomplish. And that was it without going into further details. Next question is, I think this one is great for Paulo these days. Do you plan introducing microservices?
It's okay. It's on our minds as a possibility, but not definitely not an end goal. Very keen on microservices for one reason. One big well, there's two reasons for you to go about microservices. You have a technical requirement, so you're using something like machine learning. And by the way, we're closer and closer by the day to get those capabilities in Elixir. And you kind of need to use different technologies in your in our applications, or the issue of cognitive load. You need to reduce the cognitive load that each team has, around knowing a full code base shared by a lot of folks. At this point, we're actually, I think, reaping the benefits of this modular way of building applications, but also the fact that Phoenix allows us to customize a lot, as I mentioned on a previous slide. At this precise moment, we are not using microservices, but we have a front end and a back end application. We have full instrumentation, like tracing working. We can know exactly how much time like queries take, OBAN for the background jobs is taking. We can even do things like having 3 different databases connected to our main application. At this point, we're not running microservices, but we're kind of running like separate data stores for portions of the application, which will enable us kind of quickly to do this move. Why haven't we done it so? Pragmatism. There's always a cost of going into microservices, which is another thing that you need, another couple of projects that you need to set up. Of course, there's teleports, on Kubernetes, you can connect to staging, you can use just the applications that you need, but there's a cost. And there's also one thing, I've briefly touched on this. We've adopted a vertical organization structure. So we have verticals, and within those verticals, we have teams. And this happened, I think, Marcelo, correct me if I'm wrong, I think about like 6 months ago. We kind of created these verticals, split the teams, and we are seeing where the seams, the boundaries, and I'm not talking about, bounded context, DDD language, I'm talking about the actual business boundaries are and where they overlap. And this will inform us in making a decision of how to actually split a service. Because before moving into, is it a monolith, is it microservices, macro services, whatever, is understanding one fundamental thing, which is ownership. And I've seen a lot of, adoption of the microservice architecture failing because there's no clear ownership. There's a lot of overlap. So we need to be very, very, very mindful. And about like, just if I may, around the question that popped up on the chat right now, around umbrella apps, personal, and I think I'm backed by most of the team. Umbrella apps, no, never. Like I don't like the approach of umbrella apps. It's very easy to to get things out of hand. And definitely not. There's a concept that you may explore like check about, which is like poncho apps, which Toby Pfeiffer is always talking about as as a replacement for going full on microservices. But yeah, no, umbrella apps, no. I would like to have like distinct units of deployment, totally independent, and I think like extracting code and making them on their own repositories makes much more sense if we adopt a microservices strategy. TLDR, it's a possibility. It's not decided. They're very pragmatic, understanding fully where ownership lies and how we can, break and where the boundaries of each vertical and team are. But it's an ongoing discussion. One thing that we're trying to do and moving forward is making things a lot more async, but that can be done on a monolith or microservices by using event buses, etc. Getting into a point where you get into any failure on your application gets you into a delayed application and not a broken application.
So the next question is, how do you use Redis? As a simple key value store, or do you use any more advanced features? We've used Redis in a whole lot of different ways, and we end up using less and less Redis because it ends up being, especially at scale and with multiple deployments and whatnot, it starts to become problematic in a way. It's not a lot of the technologies you find in like Postgres today. It's already enough. Um, it'll be a while until your app has grown enough that you need something like Redis to give you what you need, maybe for caching, something that it doesn't really break if it dies. That's okay. But the more time, I was huge, heavy user of Redis, and ultimately I stopped using Redis because I would get almost all I wanted from Postgres. If I wanted caching or something like that, there's also other alternatives. Redis was giving more problems. Eventually, starts giving more problems and solving things. So might as well look for simpler alternatives. Redis just became a highly marketed thing amongst developers actually, and I think it has a lot of potential. But to be honest, with Elixir ETS, with Erlang's ETS, you can get a lot of that built in, and so it's okay. About or stuff in Ukraine, about Ukraine. For those that don't know, we did a Devs for Ukraine event where we raised over 100K to donate to relief funds in Ukraine. That was it. Thank you for mentioning it and probably participating. And all the speakers that joined, it was just marvelous to see so many great talented speakers joining in. Next question. New to Elixir, what type of applications are you building with it? I've built, you can, not mobile, of course, but it was, well, I don't think it compiles yet to any mobile platform, even though you probably can in Android somehow. But web, essentially, it's an MVC like Rails, Django, not Elixir, Phoenix. Elixir is a great programming language like Ruby, Python, Java, quite compelling and great with a lot of different tools. So I think that's it.
If I may add to that,
sure.
Marcelo, maybe for folks new to the language, one thing that I definitely recommend experimenting is with Livebook. It's a wonderful piece of tool, very good for taking notes as you learn and actually execute code. I think it was with, if not the latest, the previous version that was released, that you have like Mix install, so you no longer have to have a Mix EXS file on your project to actually gather dependencies. So it enabled you to do a lot of experiences with Livebook, which is really, really, really great.
And the next question. Big concern with Phoenix monorepo project is new members modifying, breaking the core API, trying to update client apps. In addition to code review, how to solve it? Well, general rule of thumb, several things. Document your approach. Have a good architecture. Have a lot of don't trust people. Have a lot of tests in place and documentation. Even doc tests help. Where you can't do a lot more, and make sure you have the right process. For some companies, you need no QA engineering. Others you do, or deploying procedures as well. But if you don't have automated tests, then it doesn't matter how great your architecture is, because you can test it against something, and you don't need to test 100%. 80-20 rule is great. Do the 20% of tests that are going to test 80% of the use cases, and then the rest, make sure you do some sanity checking, and that should be about it. But if you have good documentation and a good code structure, it will fundamentally and truthfully help a lot.
Yeah, we're big on documentation. All of the public API the API that we expose to our front end is documented using open API specs, which was, as Marcelo said, is great to have Jose prior to the release of the latest version, the 0.13. The 13. We were looking into compile times, and things improved a lot. So we were kind of debugging an interesting problem with the help of Jose around compilation times because of those specs that we had, to make sure that we document things and things are accessible and folks, are aware of those.
The next question: as your team is growing, what are your tips to delegate tasks to new members and continue tackling the current and new features systems based on Beam? Well, essentially, so there are a few ways you can go about it. Some things we do, and it's almost organic. Of course, we have a way. At least we did it heavily. I'm not sure today, but we did tag small tasks that we could delegate to anyone new, someone that could just join in and pick up whatever is labeled as a great quick win or a Kickstarter in a way. That would help a lot. Then, of course, guiding people through the code base, having great documentation, and having more than documentation, we're having a walkthrough plan so that they don't need someone by their side or in a Zoom call to tell people, hey, this is what you need to do. And ultimately, of course, having good proper testing helps for people to know what are the guardrails and what happens if something breaks or what happens if I change this. But that is it. There's no magic silver bullet here. It's mostly depends on the team, the architecture, and the people. And sometimes you have people more dedicated to hardcore stuff. In those you need to be senior and capable. Others more product-related features, more like lightweight. You can delegate to new team members, and as they grow, they start doing more things naturally, more heavy things.
And then teams. Yeah, and to add to that, teams are very good at self-organizing around that and organizing their work. We still are using those types of tasks, and this kind of brings me back to what I mentioned before when I was telling that we have the code base that's easy to onboard. Some of the folks that join actually on the second week while they're doing the technical onboarding, they're already doing these small things, and this helps a lot solidifying the learning and consolidating it. We also have extensive documentation, as Marcelo said. We have an Elixir learning channel, which was pretty much something that that was a consequence of having this 1 month training program, which was created, and it's always there's always folks contributing to it to improve it. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do.
Okay, so there are a few questions from that I selected because to give people some opportunity to ask questions, because there's a few questions from the same person, which is great, but we want to hear everyone out. So I'm just going to go quickly. We have 2 minutes and go through it. So do you have context? This is a great question. One that loomed around for a long time, which we kept at the time as I was still coding. One of the parts of the SRP was contexts were not a part of the pattern, and so we would keep them to keep the queries, just the queries. So if like a list of queries related to the people context or the account management context, all the queries about like give me all the people by age, give me all the people by nationality, they would just be stacked in one single file. And if that grew too much, that meant that the file was doing way more than it should, and then it should be broken into more things, or more finders were needed. So yes, we tagged along context for a long time. Which language do you think it's easy for a developer to migrate to Elixir? Either Erlang or Ruby are the best to transition from, because there are a lot of similarities in a lot of different ways, either in motivation, context, or just how the syntax looks. And these are the ones that I found that were easy to jump from. You have a lot of others, but they all have some similarities. But these two personally were the ones that I felt were more similar. Paulo?
I agree. If they come from learning, they need to adapt to the language, to the syntax, but they already know the paradigm. If they come from Ruby, they have to adapt to the paradigm, and they kind of know the syntax. But it's probably the easiest ones. But we have cases of folks coming from Java as well, and it was I wouldn't say it was easy. I would say it was a blessing for them. But yeah.
There's a question about, do you think Elixir is a beginner's language? If you have no guardrails, I would say not. If you have, like, if you're today, you don't come from a computer science background, you come from whatever other areas, probably not. Why? Because the paradigm behind it is not a straightforward one. Concurrency is not something you find properly on your day-to-day lives. So if you're going to spend brain power trying to absorb all the computer science lingo behind all this, you'll spend way more time than you should to learn something. If you want to start into programming, I would say Ruby, Python, JavaScript are way easier to get into rather than, or Swift from iOS rather than Elixir, which doesn't mean to say that if you're a developer or if you have some form of developer training, then absolutely Elixir it's a great foundation. What do you think, Paulo?
I agree. I totally agree on that. Even though I think there's an effort, and I think to make the language a bit easier. And again, Livebook will help a lot on this, because you can easily have a scratch pad for the basics, the basic constructs, and using it almost like a scripting language kind of helps. But it's still not there. As Marcelo said, it's not up to things like Ruby or JavaScript, which are way more accessible.
All right, so I'm going to answer the last one before we close it off. Is Elixir a right tool to start my startup, MVP, compared to Ruby? Look, I'm going to give you the answer that I wanted to give myself if I was back then, and that I did, actually. You should start, like, customers don't care what you use. You could even use a piece of paper and a pen. They don't care. What you want is to sell something. You want to sell a product. So you can use whatever as long as it allows you to ship fast and have the least amount of problems. That's what the customers want to see, nothing else. They don't care about your hiring. They don't care about how fast internally it is, how less money you spend in infrastructure or hiring SREs or DevOps. They don't care. Like, what they do care is about the product they buy, the experience that they get. Now, in order to deliver these, you probably have to understand that if you go for a language that you're more comfortable with, probably if it's not Elixir, and maybe you're going to have a bit more downtime. Maybe you're going to have a bit more sluggish of a service. Now, is it impactful for your MVP? Probably not. A lot of code bases will grow until many thousands of users until you find the first problems. I was just too senior on Elixir to know exactly how to use it and how to build it fast. And I'll also hire the first few people to work with me that I knew that were great at Elixir. And that gave me a huge advantage into building my app. Also, for the first 2-3 years, actually until today, we had no downtime because of Elixir. We have a few times downtime because of configuration was maybe tops in 3 years, maybe 5 to 10 minutes of downtime because of configuration of the infrastructure, not Elixir itself. When I was running Ruby and Python, every single week I had downtime on one of the services because of memory was topping up, the service just died. We had to have an automated way to reboot it, but manual as well. Elixir gave me all of this, and I knew that I could put my energy into building rather than to worrying about infrastructure because I knew how it worked. Anything else, I think it's up to you to decide. Any language is great as long as you know what to do with it and you can build on top of it. And that's it. We're out of time. 4 minutes over. Thank you all for joining. It was lovely to be here with you.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful, and thank you for answering all the questions. And yeah, wish you well.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.